The most remarkable aspect of rugby is a certain indwelling of spirit. Even the visitor, not generally prone to poetic sentiment, should feel rugby's spell. If he will visit the library on a breezy summer afternoon and wait for twilight's approach, he might sense lingering in the air the presence of a melancholy but benevolent spirit that refuses to let go of the glory that was rugby. Brian Stagg wrote those words 7 years after starting a quest to create an organization that would restore and protect an unusual little village on the Cumberland Plateau of Tennessee. The former English colony, known by the name of its founder's alma mater, Rugby. Stagg's undertaking would have been ambitious for a seasoned businessman or historian. For a 16-year-old, it was extraordinary. But that's what this remarkable tiny hamlet of Rugby does. It nudges you toward the extraordinary. It inspires people to think entirely differently about the world and their roles in it. It has done this for more than 135 years. Since its inception in 1880, as a way for Victorian England's second sons, young men who stood to inherit nothing, to get a fresh start in the world, rugby has been about opportunity and about seeking something beyond the norm. It's a village that inspired successful author and member of Parliament Thomas Hughes to invest a large part of his fortune in the hopes of creating an enlightened community focused on the purest of Christian ideals. It's a village which so fascinated his 83-year-old mother, Margaret Hughes, that she left the civilized comforts of London and spent the rest of her days living in the wilderness, nurturing the ideals and sense of community in the colony her son had started. It's a village that survived epidemics, fires, economic failure, and a procession of other obstacles, yet still kept going. So when Brian Stagg thought he could rejuvenate the village, he wasn't just dreaming of something practically impossible. He was following in the footsteps of others before him, who had stepped outside what most people would consider prudent to accomplish things that would leave an indelible mark on a curious little village and on thousands of people around the world. A half century ago, the Rugby Restoration Association was formed. The group was made up of Stagg and a collection of people much older than he, people scattered across the state of Tennessee. Alice Warner Milton of Chattanooga, Oscar Martin of Gallatin, who owned a home in Rugby and served as the association's first president, Thula Justice, who owned Rugby's Roslyn House, Elizabeth King Crabtree of Charleston, Tennessee, Helen Lowry, who lived in Adena Cottage, Patricia Wickman, who with her husband Hugo resided in Kingston, Lyle, the home Thomas Hughes built for himself as a cornerstone of the community, and many others. In 1967, funding was secured to purchase Kingston, Lyle from the Wickmans. By 1968, the small association had begun giving walking tours of Kingston, Lyle, the Thomas Hughes Library, and Christ Church Episcopal. And in 1972, 17 Rugby buildings were added to the National Register of Historic Places. The Rugby Restoration Association was taking hold and taking charge. But in 1976, tragedy struck with the untimely death of Brian Stagg. The promise of a young life was gone, as was much of the energy that sparked the newest rugby movement. But the spark that Stagg created endured, and did indeed grow brighter. Stagg's sister, Barbara, became executive director of the association in 1978. Together with properties manager John Gilliatt, they helped drive decades of growth. Percy Cottage was rebuilt and a new community building started, and the original Board of Aid was restored, then lost to an arson fire, then rebuilt altogether, as was the Rugby commissary. Newberry House was restored, joining Pioneer Cottage as historic lodging. By 1982, the association changed its name to Historic Rugby, Inc. And by 1985, Historic Rugby boasted a brand new Harrow Road Cafe. The facilities were in place for Rugby to be a true visitor destination. Then Rugby also became a place for more people to live, as Beacon Hill emerged as a new residential development, with homes that kept with the architectural style of the original Rugby inns. Progress continued as Rugby stepped beyond historic preservation and into protecting the environment with the establishment of the Rugby State Natural Area, and more emphasis on hiking and the outdoors. We celebrated a new visitor center and new theater, and we greeted thousands of people with festivals, workshops, music, and other special events. Brian Stagg's dream of restoring Rugby had gone beyond what he had imagined. But what lies next? Rugby is now a living village, and the spirit that Brian Stagg saw as a teenager, that Thomas Hughes had envisioned in 1880, that countless others have experienced since then, lives on. There are new challenges. Historic Rugby used to be the go-to location for many people during festivals and events. Now, the growth of tourism on the plateau means that there are many other choices for visitors, and we must compete for attention. The people in our village have also grown older, and one goal for Rugby moving forward is to attract a new generation of people who embrace the village and the community involvement which has helped make Rugby thrive. The historic buildings require constant care, as do the natural areas surrounding Rugby. And as Historic Rugby continues with its mission to promote economic growth in the region by hiring staff and supporting local artists and craftspeople, there are new demands in technology and facilities. None of this is new. Rugby has always faced challenges and dared to think about not just what is, but what could be. Rugby was originally created as a utopia, which is a folly unto itself, because as we know, there are no utopias, and every attempt by humankind to fashion the perfect society meets with predictable failure. But the idea behind any utopia is to make the world better, and in that we believe Rugby is succeeding. Rugby is a living village, home to artists, craftspeople, teachers, professionals, inventors, scientists, storytellers, caregivers, and others with amazing talents. Rugby today still believes in the ideals that Thomas Hughes invested in more than 135 years ago. And those who are part of Rugby, the villagers, the members of Historic Rugby, the thousands of people who have been struck by the charm of this amazing place, believe that the spirit which created this village lives on in the hearts and minds of everyone who's been here. And this spirit is a treasure beyond compare.